The courtroom was so silent you could hear hearts breaking, and Elena Martinez stood at the back with her 3-year-old triplets, Lucas and Maria, clinging to her worn dress, their wide brown eyes taking in the wood-paneled walls and the strange crowd of people who pretended not to stare, while at the front, draped in designer clothes and dripping with jewelry that once belonged to Elena's late mother, sat Vanessa Holt, the woman who had stolen her husband, destroyed her marriage, and was now about to, she believed, inherit everything that should have gone to Elena's children. Elena's hands trembled as she held the letter from the law firm, an unexpected summons she almost ignored, assuming it was another bill, another reminder of how David had left her with nothing but 3 babies and a mountain of debt when he walked out 4 years ago. But her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, had insisted she go, had offered to watch the triplets, though Elena couldn't bear to be separated from them. Not today. Not when facing the ghost of the man who abandoned them. "Mama, why is that lady looking at us like that?" Sophia whispered, pointing at Vanessa, whose perfectly made-up face twisted with contempt the moment she noticed Elena. And Elena gently lowered her daughter's hand, whispering, "Some people forget how to be kind, Mia, but we never will." And she felt the weight of every sleepless night, every double shift at the diner, every time she had to choose between buying medicine or groceries, every birthday she celebrated with homemade cakes instead of the parties other children had, every moment she looked into her children's faces and saw the man who had promised her forever and delivered only abandonment. Vanessa stood suddenly, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel as she approached, her perfume overwhelming in its expensiveness, and she hissed just loud enough for Elena to hear, "You have some nerve showing up here. David left you, remember? You weren't enough for him. I was. And now everything he built, everything he owned, it's mine." And Elena felt her children press closer, felt Lucas grip her hand tighter, and she looked Vanessa in the eye with a calmness born from 3 years of survival, and said, "I'm here because I was called. Not for money, not for revenge. I'm here because the law asked me to be." And Vanessa's laugh was sharp and cruel as she returned to her seat beside a lawyer who looked uncomfortable, checking his watch. The judge entered, a silver-haired woman named Judge Patricia Moreno, whose face was kind but firm, the type of face that had seen every human tragedy and still believed in justice. And everyone rose. The triplets, imitating the adults, with serious expressions that made Elena's heart ache with love. And Judge Moreno took her seat, arranged her papers, and looked out over the courtroom with eyes that seemed to find Elena immediately, holding her gaze for a moment that felt like understanding, like solidarity. "We are here for the reading of the last will and testament of David Alexander Martinez," Judge Moreno began, her voice clear and steady, and Elena felt the room spin slightly, because she hadn't known David was dead until the letter arrived, hadn't been told, hadn't been invited to the funeral, had only learned through a legal document that the father of her children had died 6 months ago of a sudden heart attack at 42. And the grief was complicated, tangled with anger and old love and newer indifference. But mostly she felt sad for her children, who would never have the chance to know their father, even if he had been too broken to be the father they deserved. The lawyer, Mr. Jeffrey Sterling, stood with a leather portfolio, his expression carefully neutral, and began to read. "I, David Alexander Martinez, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this my last will and testament, drafted 3 weeks before my passing with the assistance of Sterling and Associates." And Vanessa leaned forward, practically vibrating with anticipation, her smile predatory, while Elena simply held her children, prepared to leave as soon as this was over, wanting nothing from David except the closure of knowing he'd at least acknowledged his children existed. "To my companion, Vanessa Holt," Mr. Sterling read, and Vanessa's smile widened, "who has been by my side these past years, I leave the following: the realization that love cannot be bought, stolen, or claimed through deception, and the courtroom gasped collectively, Vanessa's face draining of color, her mouth opening in shock, and the lawyer continued, I leave you nothing material, Vanessa, because you taught me that everything material is empty without integrity, and you possess knew I was married, knew I was abandoning my pregnant wife, and you encouraged it, celebrated it, and I was too weak and foolish to see that anyone who would help a man betray his vows would eventually betray him too, and you did, repeatedly, as I discovered before my death, and Vanessa screamed, actually screamed, that's a lie, he loved me. He left her for me, and Judge Marino's gavel came down hard. Ms. Holt, you will control yourself or be removed from this courtroom, Judge Moreno said, with ice in her voice, and Vanessa collapsed back into her seat, tears of rage streaming down her face, and Mr. Sterling, with what might have been the smallest smile of satisfaction, continued, to my wife, Elena Maria Martinez, whom I abandoned in the cruelest moment of her life, when she was carrying our 3 children and needed me most. I leave everything I have, the house on Maple Street that we bought together when we were young and still believed in forever, the investment accounts my father left me, the business I built and that is now worth substantial value, and most importantly, I leave my deepest, most profound apology, knowing it can never be enough. And Elena's tears came then, not from relief or joy at the inheritance, but from the complicated grief of hearing a dead man finally take responsibility. And she felt Sophia pat her cheek saying, don't cry, Mama, which only made her cry more. Mr. Sterling's voice grew softer, more emotional, as he read the next section. Elena, I know you have every reason to hate me, and I have no right to ask anything of you. But I need you to know the truth. Leaving you was the worst decision of my life, not because I lost you, but because I betrayed the only person who ever truly loved me without condition, and I spent the last year of my life watching you from a distance, seeing how you worked 2 jobs, how you walked our children to the park, how you smiled even when I knew you were exhausted, how you never spoke badly of me to them even though you had every right to poison them against me. And I realized I had discarded a diamond while chasing fool's gold, and the courtroom was completely silent except for muffled crying from several spectators, and even the court reporter had tears on her cheeks. I was too ashamed to approach you, too cowardly to face what I'd done, and then my heart gave out, and my time was gone. But I spent my final weeks rewriting this will, and adding something I hope will make your life easier. I created trust funds for Sophia, Lucas, and Maria, each containing enough to pay for their education, their dreams, their futures, and I've left instructions that the house be renovated to accommodate your family, with a fund for all expenses. And Elena, there's more. I've established a foundation in your name, the Elena Martinez Foundation for Single Mothers, with enough funding to help other women who have been abandoned, who are struggling as you struggled, because if my greatest sin can somehow create the greatest good, then perhaps my life wasn't entirely wasted. And Elena couldn't stop the sob that escaped her, her hand covering her mouth, because this was the man she had married, the David she had loved before something in him broke, before he ran from responsibility and into the arms of a woman who saw him as a prize to be won rather than a human being to be cherished. Vanessa stood again, her voice shrill. This is insane. I lived with him. I took care of him. She abandoned him. She drove him away with her neediness, getting pregnant when he wasn't ready, trapping him. And Judge Marino's eyes flashed with something dangerous and righteous as she stood, her voice cutting through Vanessa's hysteria like a blade. Ms. Holt, I have presided over family law for 23 years, and I have seen every excuse, every justification, every rationalization for betrayal, abandonment, and cruelty. And not once has blaming a pregnant wife for being pregnant held any legal or moral weight. Mr. Martinez made his choices, as did you, and he has now made his final choice to try to correct his wrongs. and you will respect this court and this process, or you will be held in contempt. And Vanessa, seeing no sympathy anywhere in the room, grabbed her purse and fled, her sobs echoing down the hallway. And no one moved to comfort her, because some consequences must be faced alone. Mr. Sterling approached Alina carefully, as if she were made of glass, and knelt down to be eye level with the triplets, saying gently, "Your father wanted you to know he loved you, even though he didn't know how to show it, and he hoped you would grow up to be brave and kind like your mother and Lucas, with the serious wisdom of a child who has learned too early that the world is complicated. Said we are kind, Mama teaches us," and the lawyer nodded, his professional composure cracking slightly as he stood and handed Alina a folder. "Everything is here: deeds, account information, foundation documents, and a letter he wrote to you personally, which you can read when you're ready, in private." And Alina took it with shaking hands, feeling the weight of it, the finality of it, the strange grief of receiving an apology from a ghost. Judge Moreno called Alina forward, and Alina walked to the bench with her children. And the judge looked down at them with grandmother-like warmth and said, "Mrs. Martinez, I am not supposed to offer personal opinions from the bench, but I am going to break my own rule today. Have reviewed your case, seen the financial records of how you've survived on so little, read the character statements from your employer, your neighbors, your children's preschool teacher, and every single person described you with the same words: strong, loving, selfless, and kind. And your husband's final act was to recognize what he had lost and try to build something meaningful from the ruins. And I hope you will accept this not as charity or as validation that you need it, because you built your own validation through your actions every single day, but as a resource to make your difficult journey easier and to help others on similar paths." And Alina nodded, unable to speak, and Judge Moreno smiled at the triplets and said, "And you three take care of your mama. She's a superhero." And Maria, ever bold, announced, "We know. She makes the best pancakes in the whole world," which made the entire courtroom laugh through their tears, a release of all the tension and emotion that had built up. That evening, after Mrs. Chen watched the triplets for just an hour, Alina sat alone in her small apartments, soon to be replaced by the house she thought she'd lost forever, and opened David's letter with trembling hands. And his handwriting was the same as she remembered, slightly messy, endearingly imperfect, and he wrote, "Alina, I don't ask for forgiveness, because I don't deserve it, but I ask that you tell our children that people can make terrible mistakes and still love deeply, that running away from fear doesn't make you brave, and that the strongest person I ever knew was the woman I left behind. You could have become bitter, could have taught our children to hate, could have given up, but you didn't. And watching you, I'm sorry for that invasion, but I couldn't help myself. Showed me what real love looks like. It's not romance or passion or excitement. It's showing up every single day, even when you're exhausted. It's choosing kindness when you have every reason to be cruel. It's sacrificing everything for people who are too young to even understand the depth of what you're giving. And Alina, you are the definition of love. And I was the definition of a coward. And I hope this inheritance helps you build the life you always deserved. The one I promised you and failed to deliver." And Alina cried then, really cried, for the marriage that died, for the man who got lost, for the years of struggle, and also for the unexpected gift of closure, of knowing that somewhere in his final days, David had found clarity and tried to make amends, and while it didn't erase the pain, it transformed it into something she could finally release. Over the next months, Alina moved her children into the renovated house, a beautiful place with a yard where the triplets could play, with bedrooms for each child decorated in colors they chose themselves, with a kitchen large enough for the big family dinners she'd always dreamed of hosting. And she worked with lawyers and advisors to establish the Alina Martinez Foundation, creating programs for job training, childcare assistance, legal aid, and counseling for single mothers who had been abandoned or were struggling alone. And every woman who came through the foundation's doors saw in Alina not a wealthy benefactor, but a sister who had walked their path and understood their pain. 1 year after the will reading, Alina stood in the foundation's community center at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, surrounded by the 73 women and their children who had been helped in just 12 months. And a reporter asked her, "Do you think you've forgiven your late husband?" And Alina looked at Sophia, Lucas, and Maria playing with other children, their laughter filling the air like music, and she said carefully, thoughtfully, "Forgiveness isn't about saying what happened was okay, because it wasn't. Abandoning your pregnant wife is never okay, and I won't pretend otherwise. But forgiveness is about refusing to let someone else's choices poison the rest of your life. And I forgive David not for his sake, because he's gone, but for mine, and for our children's, because they deserve to know their father tried to do one good thing, and we deserve to move forward without carrying the weight of bitterness. And most importantly, his biggest mistake became my greatest purpose, helping other women find their strength. And I think there's something powerful in transforming pain into purpose, wounds into wisdom, and abandonment into advocacy." And her words were quoted in the local paper, then picked up nationally. And soon Alina was invited to speak at conferences, to advise policymakers, to share her story with audiences who saw in her not a victim, but a victor, not someone defined by what was done to her, but by how she chose to rise. Vanessa, Alina learned through the strange grapevine of a small legal community, had moved to another state. Her social media presence vanished, her claims of being David's true love abandoned when there was no money to validate them, and Alina felt no satisfaction in this, only a distant sadness for a woman who had built her identity on being chosen by a man and had nothing left, when that man revealed she was never truly chosen at all. And Alina hoped, genuinely, that Vanessa would someday find her worth in something more substantial than designer clothes and stolen husbands. Though she suspected that lesson would take years, Vanessa might never invest. On the 5th anniversary of David's death, Alina and the triplets, now 8 years old and full of questions about the father they never knew, visited his grave for the first time. Alina had avoided it before, not ready. But the children had asked, and she felt strong enough now to face it. And they brought flowers, bright wildflowers that Maria had picked, and Alina told her children the truth, age-appropriate but honest. "Your father loved you, but he was scared, and he made a choice that hurt a lot of people, especially himself. But he tried to make it right at the end, and that matters. Not as much as if he had stayed and been brave from the beginning. But it still matters, and you are allowed to feel complicated things about him, sad and angry and curious and loving all at once, because people are complicated, and feelings don't have to be simple to be real." And Lucas asked, "Are you still sad, Mama?" And Alina smiled, a real smile, and said, "Sometimes, but mostly I'm grateful. For you three, for our home, for the work we do helping other families, and for learning that I'm stronger than I ever knew I could be." And Sophia, wise beyond her years, said, "You're the strongest person in the world." And Alina laughed and said, "I don't know about that, but I'm strong enough, and that's all any of us needs to be." That night, after tucking the triplets into their beds, reading stories, and singing the lullaby her own mother had sung to her, Alina stood on the porch of the house she'd thought she'd lost forever, and looked up at the stars, thinking about the journey from that courtroom moment when her life changed, thinking about Judge Marino's words about building her own validation, thinking about the women she'd helped, and the children who now had food and hope because of the foundation. And she realized that David's abandonment, as devastating as it had been, had forced her to discover a strength she might never have known she possessed, had pushed her to build a life so full of purpose and love that his absence became less a void and more a catalyst. And while she would never be grateful for the pain, she was grateful for who she had become in surviving it. and she whispered to the night air, to the universe, to whatever force guides broken people toward healing. Thank you for teaching me that I was never abandoned, because I always had myself, and that was enough. And in the quiet of that beautiful evening, surrounded by the evidence of her resilience, Elena Martinez finally, completely, set down the weight she'd been carrying for 8 years and stepped fully into the life she had built with her own 2 hands, her own fierce heart, and her own unbreakable spirit, knowing that the greatest inheritance she would leave her children wasn't the money or the house or the foundation, but the living example that grace, strength, and kindness can transform even the deepest wounds into the most profound wisdom, and that showing up, day after day, with love as your compass, is the truest definition of heroism.